Explanation of the book, Psych, The Story of the Human Mind, by author and psychologist Paul Bloom. We will divide the explanation into sections based on the book's chapters, presenting the most important ideas, experiments, and concepts in each section, explaining them in simple yet profound language. Paul Bloom not only presents a traditional view of psychology, but also explores controversial issues and conflicting views, illuminating the mysterious corners of the human mind. Introduction. Why study psychology? Bloom begins by clarifying the purpose of studying psychology: to understand the human psyche, its motivations, behavior, and development. He points out that psychology is not a single science, but rather a set of questions. Why do we feel fear or love? How do we make decisions? What is the difference between a normal mind and a diseased mind? Are we free to make our decisions, or does the brain decide? Chapter 1. The Origins of Psychology. Bloom traces the beginnings of psychology from philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, through scholars such as Descartes, who distinguished between body and mind, to the emergence of psychology as an independent discipline. He discusses the works of Freud and his theory of the unconscious and its enormous cultural influence, while strongly criticizing its lack of empirical support. He presents the transition to experimental psychology with figures such as Wilhelm Wundt, founded the first psychological laboratory; William James, first to introduce psychology as an independent science in America. Einitz, Chapter 2, The Evolution of the Mind, discusses how evolutionary psychology has contributed to our understanding of the nature of the human mind, based on the idea that the brain evolved to solve problems of survival and reproduction. He explains how some of our instincts, such as a fear of the dark or snakes, are rooted in our evolutionary past. He discusses why we are drawn to certain people and not others, and how genetics and environment influence our behavior. Chapter 3, Childhood and Development of the Soul. It addresses child development from birth, explaining how a child learns to recognize faces and distinguish between good and evil at a very young age. It explains Jean Piaget's stages of development and how a child's thinking abilities develop. It discusses attachment theory and the role of the relationship between the child and the caregiver in shaping their personality. Chapter 4, Cognition. How do we understand the world? How do our brains interpret sensory information, sight, hearing, touch, etc.? It presents experiments on optical illusions and explains how what we see is not always reality. It discusses attention and why we sometimes fail to notice very obvious things, such as the invisible gorilla experiment. It discusses the idea of the conscious versus unconscious mind in decision-making. Chapter 5, Emotion. Why do we feel emotions? What is their evolutionary benefit? Explains the difference between basic emotions, fear, anger, happiness, etc., and social emotions, shame, guilt, pride. Discusses the role of the emotional brain, especially the amygdala, in our emotional response. Addresses emotional intelligence and how it affects our relationships and decisions. Chapter 6, Personality and Individuality. Why do people have different temperaments? Why is one person shy and another bold? Discusses major theories of personality, such as the Big Five: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Explains how some personality traits are fixed, while others can be changed by experience and environment. Chapter 7, Mental Illness. Discusses the difference between healthy reason and mental illness, and how this distinction isn't always clear-cut. Explores illnesses such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. Explains how mental illnesses are diagnosed using the DSM and treated with medication, behavioral therapy, and talk therapy. Discusses the controversies surrounding psychiatry. Is it a real science? Are psychiatric medications necessary or overrated? Chapter 8, Love and Sex. Bloom explains how love works from a psychological and biological perspective. Discusses dopamine and oxytocin and their role in attraction and attachment. Explains the difference between lust, romantic love, and deep, long-term love. Discusses topics such as jealousy, betrayal, and polyamory. Chapter 9. Morality. Where do our morals come from? Are we innately good, or are we taught to be good? Displays famous experiments such as the trolley problem to understand moral decisions. Discusses how we evaluate others and why we feel compassion or outrage at their actions. Highlights how moral values are formed across cultures. Chapter 10. Religion and spirituality. Does the brain have a natural tendency toward faith? Why are religions prevalent in every culture? Explains theories in the psychology of religion, such as that religion provides a sense of meaning and belonging. Discusses the relationship between spiritual experiences and neural activity in the brain. Chapter 11. Consciousness. One of the most complex and profound topics in the book. What is consciousness? How can a physical thing like the brain produce a subjective experience? Discusses experiments that show that our decisions are sometimes made before we are conscious of them. Also discusses some theories such as integrated information theory, world space theory. The final chapter, Can a Mind Be Built? Bloom explores the relationship of psychology to artificial intelligence. Orman discusses questions such as, can a robot feel? Can a machine have consciousness? Is there a difference between simulating intelligence and actually possessing it? Conclusion. What does it mean to be human? Bloom brings the reader back to the fundamental question. What is the human mind, and why is it special? He argues that psychology is not only a tool for understanding others, but also a mirror for understanding oneself. He urges humility. We are still at the beginning of our understanding of the mind, and many of the big questions remain unanswered. Concluding remarks. The book is filled with real-life examples and engaging psychological experiments. Bloom seamlessly blends narrative and scientific style. He doesn't take a single position, but rather presents different perspectives and leaves you free to think.